AskReddit by OK Slide 23. What's the most unexpected or interesting thing you've learned from a podcast recently? One of Johnny Cash's biggest hits, Ring of Fire, was actually written about him, though he didn't know it at the time. June Carter wrote the song after meeting him years before. She felt she was falling in love with him, and the song is about how she was going to hell for it because she was married. She actually sang back up on Johnny Cash's version of it. Years later, they met yet again when they were both divorced, and everyone knows she eventually became June Carter Cash. Pictures and words. It really changed my relationship. Relationship podcast was talking about it. We think in pictures. We talk in words. If I say dog, one person might picture a Great Dane and the other person might picture Chihuahua. Now imagine the other person comes back with a Chihuahua and I was picturing Great Dane. Suddenly we are fighting when we both agreed on dog. Our words were the same but our pictures were not. This applies to pretty much everything from great vacation to clean house to relaxing weekend to whatever. Guy said that you make relationships better when you talk about your pictures, not just your words. This is fascinating. Do you mind sharing the name of the podcast? I'm not normally a podcast person, but I'd give that a listen. That male crocodiles get very aroused when they hear a sustained B flat played on a tuba. I mean, who doesn't? I listened to an Australian podcast called Go On, and their recent episode was about the creation of the Oxford Dictionary. It was interesting to learn about the number of people involved in the decades it took to complete. It's a pretty funny podcast, and they made a dry topic very entertaining. The Professor and the Madman is a very good movie with a stellar cast about this very subject. It was more than a labor of love, it was a labor of madness. From a tradition of violence, how extensively criminal gangs have infiltrated and run the Los Angeles Sheriff's Department for decades. Not just the usual cliche about violent cops, but actual gangs with tattoos, initiation rites that include murdering citizens to earn a place in the gang, the works. And it's not just the LASD, although that's the primary focus of the podcast. For many years movies and TV have hinted at this, with LA Confidential, To Live and Die in LA, Training Day and others. But the reality is much worse. Behind the Bastards this week is about the Hawks Nest Tunnel disaster. Union Carbide was one scummy corporation. I recently watched a documentary on the completely preventable Bhopal disaster. You see, and how are so evil. I learned that A Boy Named Sue is the Shel Silverstein song. Cash just covered it and made it famous. He also covered another song and expanded its reach. Hurt. That Arnold Schwarzenegger is effing hilarious. At least he was on Conan O'Brien Needs a Friend. Harrison Ford, too. There is a remote spot in the southern part of Pacific Ocean called Point Nemo, which is the spot on Earth that is furthest from land in any direction. In theory, a person who found themselves at Point Nemo might be closer to the astronauts on the ice than any human beings on land. It's also called a spacecraft cemetery because it's where lots of decommissioned spacecraft land back on Earth, to minimize the risk of harming anyone upon impact. In the podcast I listened to, a fictional guy went to this point to try get as far away from other human beings as physically possible, and was promptly killed when he was beamed in the face by a falling spacecraft. Point Nemo is real, but I don't believe anyone has ever been killed by falling space debris. Somebody asked Dr. Peter Attia what the best diet to follow is. His response was, figure out how much protein you need, figure out how many carbohydrates you can tolerate, and do healthy fats for the rest. I don't think I have it verbatim, but it was close to that. I thought it was a simple way to look at it. I know it's a hotly debated topic, but I'm a sucker for simplicity. Seems like fiber and sodium should be added to that list of things to pay attention to. Might be known by some, but French fries are not French but originated in Belgium. In some regions of Belgium they speak French, And that's where American GIs came to know of them during WWII. Freedom fries. Just this morning I learned this. LPOTL Manhattan Project series. There was a 3-day riot in San Francisco when WW2 ended, the deadliest in the city history. The rioters were mostly soldiers still in boot camp who hadn't even seen combat but had been told that they were going to the Pacific to die horribly. The police were told to let revelers celebrate within reason. Well, that eventually escalated into 1,000 injured, at least half a dozen gang RPs and incalculable damages to the city. The Australian police took over and ran the world's biggest child porn site on the dark web, a sting operation after the founder of the site, a Canadian man in his early 20s, was arrested in America for raping a 4-year-old. That piece of shit is now in prison for life and hundreds of abusers were arrested as a result of the sting. Check out Hunting Warhead. It's not a feel-good story, obviously, but hella interesting. Pixels from a crime scene is a good follow-up to this. It's the most inside look really available on the Internet Watch Foundation, IWF, who operate in the UK but track CSAM all over the world. I found the things they do to try and keep their employees sane interesting. They have to rotate every 6 months, get mandatory counseling. They even have limits on any exposure. Really horrible job, but tons of respect for those who can do it, and I was glad they had so many things in place to try to keep them safe. Blue jays seldom raid nests. Only 1% of their diet is from other birds' eggs, and when it does happen, it's because they're lacking enough calcium to make solid ones of their own. That and they are related to crows and ravens. Highly intelligent, they can use rudimentary tools and mimic predators to clear out other birds so they can take entire areas to feed for themselves. The name Wendy didn't exist before J.M. Barrie wrote Peter Pan. He made the name up for the character in the book. It came from him being unable to pronounce the word friend as a child, and it came out as Wendy instead. Was listening to the newest episode of Dan Carlin's Hardcore History about the Viking Age. I am a bit of a grammarian and a nerd about history, mythology, etymology, and stuff like that. I had absolutely no clue that the words Tuesday, Wednesday, Odin, and Thursday, Thor, were all derived from the names of Norse gods. Friday Freeze Day. Monday Moon's Day. Saturday Saturn's Day, Roman. Sunday Sun's Day. For those who go into a detox facility, their length of time spent there isn't based solely on medical suggestions but how many days their insurance will pay. Additionally, a psych hospital is the worst place in the world for someone who is in distress. Friend of mine went to one a few months ago. They robbed him, gave him medication he told them he was allergic to, and then abandoned him while he vomited, and worse, as a result. Turns out it was all on tape. They'd been doing this for years, and now there's a massive lawsuit that more than 1,000 former patients who experience the same thing have joined. His refusal to accept their lies and dismissals because, as they claim, these people are crazy. They must have imagined it is appalling and illegal. Meanwhile, both a nurse and an orderly were caught trying to use his credit card all over around town. There was an animated Ghostbusters cartoon, which had a gorilla Ghostbuster named Tracy, and it was canon that it was related to King Kong. This was the Filmation animated series, not related to any of the popular Ghostbusters. Actually, Filmation had a live-action Ghostbusters on TV. And then producers of the Dan Aykroyd vehicle licensed the name Ghostbusters from Filmation. After the movie's success, talk began about a cartoon based on the movie. But Filmation got greedy and, since they owned the Ghostbusters brand, decided to come up with their own cartoon, Filmation's Ghostbusters, with the gorilla. And this is why the movie-based cartoon is called The Real Ghostbusters. And it was the winner by a mile. Learning about the Haitian Revolution was super interesting. Also really the framework for the Grand Atlantic Revolution from the Whole Revolutions podcast actually was super fascinating. True crime, placing a pile of clothes on a corpse obfuscates time of death. This works. Asking for a friend. How often Christian people ate fish and avoided meat in the Middle Ages because of religious holidays. I knew people ate fish on Fridays or during Lent. I didn't realize how common it was on other days though. I think it almost came out to be around 25% of days. Infinite Monkey Cage had a great explanation on how AI works called the Chinese room. It really dispels a lot of the Skynet theories people have. Is the episode called The Chinese Room? I'm not seeing it when I search for that title. There is one called How Eyes Are. Is this the one you're referring to? Australian cricket great Keith Miller, almost certainly, had an affair with Princess Margaret. So Keith Miller was a bit of a pants man? What was the podcast? How IMF loans allow oligarchs to pillage Argentina, a situation that will only get worse with the new president-elect. https://fair.org/military-is-really-is-get-in-right-wing-libertarian-ideas/ Too many to count. A History of Rock Music in 500 Songs by Andrew Hickey and X200B. If you care about rock and roll at all, this is indispensable. And X200B. And X200B. And X200B. And X200B. And X200B. Hick.